Tonight, we walk a corridor lit by a single lamp, where dust hangs like quiet stars. A door clicks, and the air cools ink, leather, and the hush of guarded memory. Something waits on the shelf that history chose not to keep. We begin underground, no titles, no speeches, only keys, breath, and stone. A drawer slides open. Inside, a bundle of thin pages stitched with red thread. Shapes, names, maps that do not match our world. These pages speak softly. They do not shout. They show a trail of cities with no ruins, rivers with no beds, and languages that move like music. A monk's margin note says, "Not for public reading." Another says, "Return before dawn." You can feel the care in each stroke of ink, as if the writer feared the paper itself might vanish if pressed too hard. We follow the path as it is given, fragments, testimonies, and careful drawings. One scribe describes a coast scene from a skyboat. Another sketches a star map that points to a city beneath bright water. There are seals, corrections, and slips of vellum that hide lines, as though the text were a living thing still adjusting its cloak. This is not a tale of scandal, it is a study of silence. We will move like water through narrow channels, asking simple questions. Why preserve what cannot be shown? Why guard names we were taught never existed? Why do the maps feel familiar when the places do not? Here, the pace is slow by design. We handle each page with respect. We listen for the sound beneath the words, the steady pulse of a memory trying to be remembered. If these civilizations were erased, they left echoes, tools, prayers, and ways of measuring the sky. The records do not beg us to believe, they invite us to notice. So we begin, lamp in hand, stepping into rooms where history still breathes, and the past waits to be seen without fear. The air is cool, carrying the faint scent of paper that has not been touched for years. A corridor stretches ahead, narrow and uneven, lined with shelves that rise higher than the eye can follow. The lamp in your hand hums with a low light, its glow barely enough to show the path. Every step brings a hush, as though the stone beneath your feet has been trained to remember silence. Here, words are not spoken but guarded, and the sound of your breath feels out of place, like a trespass inside a prayer. The key is still warm from your palm. Its shape is plain, yet the weight of it carries centuries. It slides into the lock with a sound too loud for this space, a sound that echoes into the hidden corners of the vault. The door shifts, heavy but obedient, opening onto a room where darkness folds itself like cloth. You lift the lamp, and the light climbs across rows of boxes tied with red thread. They are not labelled with titles or dates, only with numbers that seem to belong to no system. Some threads are frayed, some perfectly intact, as if time itself bends differently inside this chamber. You step forward, the lamp trembling in your hand. Dust rises, soft and silver, catching in the glow like scattered stars. For a moment, you feel the breath of the past on your skin pages, whispering, binding, sighing, words trying not to be forgotten. A single box rests on a table, unlike the others that sleep on shelves. Its lid is half open, as if left behind in haste. Inside, there are pages stitched loosely, drawings of coastlines that do not exist, rivers bending in shapes no mapmaker today could accept. A name is written in careful script, then crossed out so firmly that the paper has torn. You trace the tear with your finger. It feels alive, like a wound. Whoever tried to erase this name did not succeed entirely. The ghost of the letters still glimmers when the lamp leans close. You realize the archive is not a grave, but a cage. What is kept here is not dead, but waiting. You place the lamp nearer, and the flame stirs. Shadows grow long, shaping the outlines of cities that no longer rise, ships that no longer sail, and stars charted in skies that do not match our heavens. The key in your pocket presses against your side, reminding you that you do not belong here, not fully. Yet the room does not expel you. Instead, it watches. as if to measure what you are willing to carry back into the world above. You close the box gently, binding it again with its thread. You know you will return. And when you do, it will not be for curiosity alone, but for the quiet responsibility that grows when one has looked directly into silence and seen it looking back. The lamp flickers. The lock turns once more. Behind the door, the room exhales, settling back into its long vigil. A ledger lies open on a wooden stand, its surface worn smooth by countless hands. The ink is pale, as though it has been watered down deliberately, so that every word seems half present and half withdrawn. You lean close and see that the entries are not lists of possessions or accounts, but of names, whole cultures compressed into single lines, each one marked not with description, but with a small symbol, a cross, a circle, a blank. It is a book of what is not, a record of what has been removed. You read the first line aloud, softly, though you do not know how to shape the syllables. The sound vanishes into the air without echo. Beneath it, another entry. A people said to have lived at the edge of a great inland sea. The sea is gone, and the people with it. But the ledger insists they were once known. It does not say why they vanished, only that their name was folded out of speech. You notice how the ink grows faint near certain lines, as if even the letters did not want to remain. The further you turn the pages, the stranger the entries become. Here is a civilization described only as builders of hollow stone. No date, no place, only this fragment. Another lists the singers of wind, their script struck through by a sharp hand, leaving only scratches where words once were. And then a blank page, no names, no symbols yet in the corner, a single note. Return before dawn. You pause, wondering if absence itself is a kind of presence. To strike a name is to admit it once lived. To leave a page blank is to suggest the truth beneath cannot be spoken, but must still be remembered. The ledger, you realize, is not an erasure, it is a shadow. The shadows prove that something once stood in the light. A thought settles over you. History is not only what is written, but also what is allowed to remain. The missing names become louder than the ones preserved. You close the book, but its silence clings to you, following like a second shadow. As you walk away, you feel each step marked by those absences, carried forward into the night, as if they were waiting for someone willing to bear them. The manuscript is thick, bound in dark leather that creaks when opened. At first glance, it appears ordinary, hymns, prayers, and meditations. But when the lamp draws nearer, the true words appear not in the main text, but along the edges. The margins whisper, filled with smaller, hurried script, the hand of monks who could not resist leaving behind their traces. The prayers run straight, steady, sanctioned, but the margins curve and lean, almost playful, as though the writer's heart could not stay within the lines. Here, next to a psalm, a note, this song hides the measure of the stars. Next to a blessing, another, the map lies in the refrain. And beneath a benediction, a careful sketch of a shoreline, with mountains that curve too sharply to belong to any known coast. You run your finger along the edge, feeling the raised ink. The margins are not commentary, they are keys. One monk writes, "Do not trust the hymn alone. Read the spaces." Another warns, "Erase if found. Copy to no one." Their urgency feels alive, as though the margins themselves still protect what the text could not reveal openly. You pause at a page where the hymn repeats the phrase, "Light eternal, light eternal." In the margin, a hand has drawn a circle divided into 12 parts, each marked with unfamiliar signs. You realize the hymn is a code, the rhythm a clock, the repetition a calendar. The hymn sings of light, but the margins speak of time. Together they form a map. The pages tremble as you turn them. Some margins are smeared, as if someone once tried to wipe them clean. Others are faint, written so small that only the lamp can draw them out. It is as though the margins knew they were not meant to survive, and yet by their persistence they endured. You close the book with care. The room feels warmer now, filled with the murmurs of voices who risked their place in order to preserve what they knew. The margins remind you that truth often hides where it is least expected, not in the grand declarations of the centre, but in the quiet lines along the edges. As you set the book back on its shelf, you feel a promise forming silently within yourself. You will remember the margins, you will carry their whispers forward, and in the stillness of the archive, where silence is supposed to reign, you hear it clearly. History is not only written, it is whispered, hidden, and waiting for someone willing to listen. The first thing you notice is the thread. Not the pages or the boxes, but the thin line of red fibre that binds them. It looks delicate, almost fragile, but when you tug gently, you find it is stronger than you expect, pulled tight across centuries. The knots are small, deliberate, and tied in ways that suggest ritual as much as security. To cut through such thread feels like trespassing against more than paper. It feels like breaking a vow. The lamp flickers against the bundles resting in their quiet rows. Some strings have frayed edges, split into strands like hair. Others are clean, taut, untouched by time. Each packet looks the same, yet each carries a different tension, as though the one who tied it left their own weight of secrecy in the fibre. Some knots are simple, others complex, woven with loops that remind you of prayers or coded gestures. You wonder how many hands trained to tie them, how many hands dared to untie them. When you pick up a bundle, the sound is soft cloth, rubbing against cloth, paper shifting faintly inside. You tilt it in the light. On one corner, a wax seal rests, cracked but still recognizable. The impression shows a symbol you do not know, a circle broken by a single line, like a horizon split by dawn. Around it, faint Latin letters whisper, though the words themselves resist clarity. The wax is dark, hardened like stone, yet even so, you can feel the intention pressed into it, the warning that whoever opens this does so against the will of the one who sealed it. You think of how many of these bundles must have been prepared. Each thread tied, each seal pressed, each packet hidden inside the archive. It was not done in haste. It was careful, methodical, and patient. To bind knowledge is not simply to keep it safe. It is to decide who may see it and when. The red thread is not only a marker of secrecy, but of order, a sign that the archive is less a storehouse and more a labyrinth. You place the bundle back on the table. The thread shines faintly in the lamplight, like blood frozen in place. And for a moment you understand that the greatest secrets are not always burned. Some are tied, bound, and left waiting for the one who can see beyond the knots. The red thread holds not only pages but memory, and memory, once bound, can wait forever. You are told the rule without words. It lingers in the margins of notes, scratched faintly into wood, whispered through symbols that repeat across boxes and ledgers. Return before dawn. At first, it seems a practical instruction, a reminder to put things back before the next keeper arrives. But the longer you stay in the archive, the more it feels like something else. A warning, a boundary between what can be touched in darkness and what must not see daylight. The hours pass differently here. The air does not shift, and the silence does not soften. Your lamp burns steadily, yet you cannot tell if minutes or hours have gone by. You read a line, then another, then lose your place, not because the text is unclear, but because time itself becomes blurred. You feel the rule tugging at you, the way a tide pulls at the shore. Return before dawn. It is not advice, it is law. One page you find describes a ritual, a scholar permitted to read only between night prayers and first light. He writes of how the ink seemed to change colour after the bell of midnight, as though the words themselves drew strength from darkness. Another entry says, the texts lose their power once the morning sun touches them. The page insists they must not breathe the same air as dawn. You close the book, unsettled. Perhaps it is superstition, perhaps it is memory, Or perhaps the knowledge here was shaped for night alone, for hours when the world is soft and doubt has not yet woken. You imagine the monks reading by candle, their eyes burning with exhaustion, their hands copying lines they did not fully understand, yet bound by the same command: finish, return, and lock away before morning. You glance at your lamp, the flame bends as though reminding you. You are no monk, no sworn keeper, yet the rule weighs on you all the same. The archive seems to watch, to breathe slowly, waiting for you to obey. And in that moment, you realize dawn is not only a time, it is a threshold. What belongs to the night cannot cross it unchanged. So, you place the pages back. You tighten the thread. You let the lamp guide you out. Behind you, the silence folds itself closed, patient, certain that the rule will outlast you. At first glance, the shelf is unremarkable. Rows of hymnals, prayer books, and devotionals, their spines cracked, their pages worn thin. The kind of books copied endlessly across centuries, meant for recitation, not for secrets. Yet, as you pull one down, its weight surprises you. Heavier than it should be, the pages thick, as if layered with something beneath. You open it, expecting verses of praise, and find them there. But between the lines, in the way the words fall, something else moves. The prayers are repetitive, almost monotonous. Blessed light, blessed light, blessed light. The same phrase, written 3 times, each line slightly altered in spacing. To the untrained eye, it is only devotion. But when you step back, the words form a pattern. The gaps between phrases sketch the shape of a coastline. The rhythm of repetition mimics tide and wave. You run your finger along the gaps, tracing the outline of a shore you have never seen. Further in, a psalm speaks of the stones that sing when struck by wind. The verse sounds poetic until you notice the margin, a faint drawing of pillars arranged in a row, with lines above them marking airflow. It is not poetry, but architecture disguised as prayer. Another hymn praises the fire that cools, the water that burns. A riddle, unless you know of minerals and alchemy hidden in plain sight. The book is not only devotional, it is a manual, a map, a code, wrapped in sanctity. You glance at the shelf again. Dozens of similar books wait, their spines carrying the same titles. To any eye, they are ordinary. To those who know, they are repositories of what could not be named. You realize the strategy is perfect. To hide a secret, place it in the open, disguised as the most common thing. No one questions a book of prayers. No one suspects hymns of hiding cities. You close the devotional and return it to its place. Its spine vanishes into the row of many. And you wonder how many centuries passed with monks singing words they thought were only praise, never knowing they were reciting maps, formulas, and histories. Perhaps some did know and let the chant carry knowledge forward under the cover of worship. Perhaps the voices that filled chapels also kept alive the memories of civilizations erased from daylight. As you step back, the thought stays with you. Not all prayers are prayers. Some are maps, some are codes. Some are the only way truth survives when it is forbidden to exist. And perhaps, in some forgotten chapel, voices still rise in song, repeating lines that once guided ships, built cities, and remembered worlds we were never meant to know. The Psalms open with familiar cadence, lines of praise, lines of sorrow, rhythms meant to be sung aloud by many voices at once. To the casual eye, they are sacred songs, written only for devotion. But as you let your finger rest on the words, you notice something strange. The spacing is uneven. Some stanzas break where no rhythm demands, while others stretch with needless repetition. At first, you dismiss it as the quirks of a tired scribe. Yet, as you turn the pages slowly, the pattern emerges like water filling cracks in stone. Each verse, when aligned differently, becomes a line of a map. Vertical breaks turn into rivers. Indented lines form coastlines. A refrain, repeated 3 times, curves exactly into the arc of a mountain chain. The psalm is not only song, it is geography, folded into devotion. You tilt the page in the lamplight. Tiny marks sit between words. Dots, strokes, faint scratches. They are not punctuation, though they resemble it. A monk's hand has hidden latitude in ink. One psalm praises the four winds that meet at the place of rest. But when you trace the verse backward, each word begins with a letter that, strung together, spells a place name. You whisper it, uncertain. The sound feels old, like dust stirred from stone, like the syllables themselves have not been spoken for centuries. The further you read, the clearer it becomes. Entire choruses point to landmarks no longer on modern maps. Hills described as crowns align with drawings in another text. Valleys called silent waters form the curve of a basin long erased by desert. The Psalms are atlases, meant to be sung not just to God but to memory. You imagine the monks in their candle-lit chapels, chanting these words with reverence, their voices echoing against stone, unaware, or perhaps aware, that with every chorus they were rehearsing the shape of forgotten lands. To them, the chant carried prayer. To the careful reader, the chant carried direction. One hymn ends with a plea, "Carry us safely, O light, to the harbour of truth." But in the margin, drawn faintly in ink, is a coastline shaped unmistakably like a crescent. You close the psalter slowly, the sound of the parchment soft against itself. What had been dismissed as monotony of worship reveals itself as cartography disguised in song. The Psalms are no longer only laments or praises, they are maps. And each time they were sung, a memory was preserved in plain sight, safe inside the harmony of devotion. At first, the page seems empty, yellowed vellum, rough along the edges, brittle from centuries of air. You tilt it in the lamplight, and faint lines shimmer, then vanish. The ink is there, but it does not wish to stay. It clings only in shadow, disappearing whenever the light grows strong. You breathe on the page softly. Moisture blooms across the surface, and for a brief second, words appear. Lines of text curve and bend, then retreat again as the surface dries. The ink was never meant to last, it was meant to hide. Not from time, but from eyes. The formula is unknown, but you sense purpose in every stroke. Whoever wrote this did not want it burned or copied. They wanted it to remain only for those who knew how to coax it forth. The words you glimpse are fragments. Harbour, stone of blue fire, 12 steps descending. The rest dissolves before you can trace them. You lean closer, testing with the edge of your finger. But the text recoils like breath fading in cold air. It resists permanence. It is alive in its own way, refusing to give itself fully to you. In the margins, another hand has left instructions. Heat gently, do not linger. Too much light, and the truth is lost. You wonder how many seekers ruined pages by rushing, burning, erasing, forcing ink that demanded patience. You hold the page carefully above the lamp. Slowly, shapes emerge. A spiral, marked with 12 small dots, a description of a city that sings when struck by storm. The letters quiver in the glow, trembling as though they might vanish again at any moment. And then they do, slipping back into the fibres, invisible once more. You lean back, your heart unsteady. This ink was more than pigment. It was intention. A way to make memory survive by being invisible most of the time. To ensure only the patient, the careful, the reverent could read. Secrets preserved not by strength, but by refusal. You imagine the scribe, hunched in a cell, mixing powders and oils, whispering prayers as he wrote, knowing that centuries later, someone might hold the same page, coax the same words, and feel the same fleeting presence of a vanished world. The ink is gone again now, but the memory of its shimmer remains in your mind. Some knowledge, you realize, is meant to visit, not to stay. In a stack of prayer manuals, one book is heavier than the rest. Its spine creaks when you open it, revealing hymns written in large script. But as you turn a page, something shifts. A slip of vellum, thin and light, slides to the floor. You stoop to pick it up. Its edges are smoother than the others, as though handled many times. On its surface, faint writing appears, but when you hold it over the hymn beneath, the words align perfectly with the gaps in the text. Together, they form something else entirely. The slip is not random. It is designed to overlay the hymn like a second voice in harmony. Alone, it says little, a line about stones, another about fire. But placed over the hymn, the words interlace to reveal, the stones of fire guide the traveller east. You place it aside, then test another page. Again, the hymn reads one way alone, but when paired with the slip, it transforms into instruction. The more you experiment, the more you see the brilliance. The slip acts as a key, unlocking a hidden layer of text. Without it, the hymn is ordinary. With it, the hymn becomes a manual. You find instructions for crossing deserts, for charting the stars, for recognizing coastlines that exist on no map today. Each hymn holds double meaning, one for prayer, one for memory. You wonder how many slips once existed, and how many have been lost, how many hymns remain locked, their second voices silenced. The monks who created these tools must have known they were weaving two realities into one, the sacred and the forbidden, devotion and knowledge. You lift the vellum to the light, its thin surface glows, and for a moment it feels alive, like skin that has carried secrets too long. The hymn beneath waits, patient, unchanged. But with the slip in place, it speaks more clearly than it was ever meant to. You slide the vellum back between the pages. The book closes with a sigh, as though relieved to keep its silence again. You realize that history often hides not by erasing, but by layering, placing one text over another, until only the trained eye sees what remains. The slip of vellum is proof that truth was not destroyed. It was folded, hidden, waiting for the right hands to align the layers and hear the hymn as it was truly meant to be sung. The book you open tonight is not remarkable in its binding. It is leather stretched thin, corners rubbed soft by hands no longer remembered. The pages carry words of sermons, stories, the expected passages of guidance and faith. Yet, as your lamp leans closer, you see the spaces, not blank in the way of laziness or oversight, but deliberate. Paragraphs ending mid-thought, sentences broken off before their natural close, a rhythm of silence threaded through text that should have been whole. At first, it feels clumsy. Perhaps the scribe was tired, perhaps pages were lost, but as you read further, the pattern deepens. In one tale of a prophet crossing a desert, the journey is described in detail, sand, wind, thirst, until suddenly the line stops, and there, upon the nothing follows. The next page begins a new prayer, as if the story was never meant to be finished, but your eyes catch what was left behind. In the margin, faint indentations remain where ink once pressed. The words were there, but they were lifted away, scraped from the surface of the vellum. Erased, but not forgotten. You tilt the page. Under the lamp's glow, grooves shimmer like ghost rivers. With patience, you can almost make out the shapes. They describe something that does not belong in Scripture, an encounter not with angels, but with builders of stone towers reaching beyond the line of sight. The omission is not a mistake. It is censorship dressed in devotion. The further you go, the clearer it becomes. Every omission conceals something large. Technologies mistaken for miracles. Cities veiled as visions. Instructions on how to measure the heavens hidden beneath metaphors of faith. The omissions are the architecture of control. By leaving gaps, the keepers made the reader dependent on what was allowed, yet the absence itself whispers louder than the words. You lean back, the silence pressing heavy. The art of omission is not destruction, it is subtler than fire. Fire leaves nothing but ash, omission leaves echoes. Echoes that can be followed if you learn to listen to what is not said. The missing words become doorways. the pauses become maps. You close the book, your hand trembling, not because of what you read, but because of what you did not. The map is drawn in pale lines, tucked inside the ledger like a secret folded within a secret. At first, it appears to be a coastline, a crescent bay, with small markings where rivers meet the sea. You study it carefully. Something about the contours feels wrong. The rivers do not match any known land. The mountains curve into impossible shapes, ridges too sharp to exist. And then you notice the note at the bottom, written in a hand, so faint it nearly disappears. Beneath bright water lies the city of light. You imagine it as you read. A city not built upon land, but under the surface, where columns rise like forests, carved from stone that glimmers when touched by moonlight. The streets are described not as paths, but as currents, marked by signs that shift with the tide. The ledger says its builders wove copper that did not tarnish, bridges that shone even in darkness, towers that shimmered when the sea pressed against them. The water itself was part of the design, carrying sound, carrying light, carrying memory. The psalm you read earlier comes back to you. Lead us to the harbour of truth. Now you wonder if it pointed not to a metaphor, but to this, the city beneath water, hidden not by distance or desert, but by the sea itself, preserved in silence. The ledger suggests it was erased, not because it vanished, but because it still exists. To reveal it would be to admit a world outside the reach of sanctioned history. You run your finger along the map's edge. The ink is smeared where someone tried to blur the coastline, yet the shape remains, stubborn against erasure. You picture divers of another age, slipping beneath waves with nothing but air in their lungs, carrying torches sealed against water, descending into a world where walls hum with tides. You close your eyes and hear it, the sound of water pressing, the faint ring of stone that sings when waves strike, the echo of voices chanting in caverns lit by filtered Sunday, a city not lost but waiting. The archive does not tell you how to reach it. It does not give coordinates or bearings. It gives only the whisper, beneath bright water lies the city of light, enough to remind you it was real, enough to remind you it may still be. The drawing is simple, almost childlike, a series of steps carved into rock, leading down toward waves. Yet the annotation suggests something far more deliberate. The steps are described as 12 descending, 12 ascending, built in stone that resisted erosion, each stair marked with symbols, fish, sun, spiral, crescent, an entire language carved into descent. You trace the lines with your finger, imagining the journey. At low tide, the stairs stretch out like a road, leading walkers toward the horizon. At high tide, they vanish completely, swallowed by the sea. The notes say the stairs were not meant to remain visible always. They were built for rhythm, for those who understood the tide's breath, who knew when to walk and when to wait. One margin describes a ritual. At the 12th step, offer silence. At the 12th return, offer song. You picture it, pilgrims, descending as the sea recedes, waiting at the edge where land gives to water, then climbing back as waves return. Not just a staircase, but a calendar, a ritual clock set to the pulse of ocean and moon. The ledger connects it to the city beneath bright water. The stairs, it says, were gateways. Not all entered, not all returned. Some believed the tide itself was a veil, opening briefly to those who carried knowledge, closing upon those unready. The carvings were warnings as much as invitations. The spiral marked transformation. The crescent marked passage. The fish marked survival. You imagine standing there now, waves curling at your feet, salt air thick on your lips, the stairs glistening, wet with the memory of centuries. The symbols whispering their meaning, if only you paused long enough to listen. You imagine stepping forward, feeling each mark beneath your foot, each descent carrying you deeper, not just into sea, but into memory. The text closes with a phrase that lingers in your mind. To descend is to remember. To return is to carry light. You close the book, the lamp trembling in your hand. The stairs may be gone, washed away by centuries of tide. Or perhaps they still stand, waiting under moonlight, their carvings softened but not erased, leading those willing to follow into silence, into water, into a memory the archive tried to hide, yet could not destroy. The manuscript opens with the dull shimmer of drawings in faded ink. It depicts tools, rods, and sheets of metal stacked neatly, their surfaces marked with strange runes. A monk's hand has added notes in Latin, though the handwriting falters as if uncertain of its own witness. Copper, yet not copper. You trace the words, hearing their quiet disbelief echo through time. The description tells of a civilization along a vanished coast, their workshops humming with fireless furnaces. They did not melt ore in blazing heat, as miners and smiths of later centuries would. Instead, they are said to have coaxed metal from stone by sound vibrations chanted in rhythm, voices aligned with hammers that never struck. The copper they drew forth shone brighter than gold, but more astonishing was this: it never dulled. The records call it the living metal. No air corroded it, no water stained it. Even centuries after its burial, pieces recovered were said to gleam as though freshly made. A scribe sketches a goblet retrieved from sand, still glowing with a red-gold fire under the moonlight. The same goblet was hidden again, the note insists, for fear of envy. As you read, you imagine the workshops, wide halls of stone, lit by shafts of sunlight reflected through polished mirrors. In the centre, great slabs of ore resting in troughs of water. Around them, singers, men and women chanting syllables in deep tones. The ore quivers, the water hums, and slowly, bright veins emerge. No fire, no smoke, only resonance. The monks' notes grow frantic in places, as if they struggled to believe what they copied, yet they did not stop. Their duty was to preserve, even when preservation meant recording the impossible. The copper was not used for coins or weapons, not in the way later empires would hunger for metal. Instead, it adorned bridges, rooftops, and towers. Entire cities shimmered like dawn, their walls glowing with light that never faded. Travellers described them as eternal sunrises resting upon earth. The metal caught starlight at night and reflected it into rivers, so that the waters shone even in darkness. Why hide such knowledge? The notes offer hints. One margin reads, "Jealousy is quicker than faith." Another, "Gold draws kings, but this draws war." The living copper was too perfect, too enduring. To reveal it would be to invite conquest beyond measure. So it was bound in secrecy, recorded only in these fragile lines. You imagine what might have become if this secret had survived. Cathedrals glowing without candle, monuments unscarred by centuries, bridges that never crumbled. But perhaps it is better this way, hidden. For even as you think of beauty, you feel the shadow of greed waiting behind it. The city of copper lies beneath water and sand, and the pages close upon it, their silence heavier than any lock. The drawing is simple. A wall stretching into the sea, waves curling against it and atop the wall. Tall frames with strings pulled taut. At first, you think them decorations, perhaps markers for sailors, but the notes describe something else. The wall sang when storms approached. The wall sang when the sea grew restless. The structures were harps, vast and hollow, built into the very breakers that guarded the city. Each frame was strung with cords woven from material unknown. The text says only, "Fibers that did not decay." When wind swept across the sea, it struck these harps, filling the air with deep, resonant tones. The sound was not random. It shifted with pressure, with tide, with storm. To the citizens, it was warning and comfort. They knew by tone when to close gates, when to open channels, when to prepare. You imagine standing on that shore, the surf roaring at your feet, while from the breaker walls rises a chorus of tones, low, vibrating, immense. Not music in the sense of entertainment, but music as signal, as language. The wall itself was an instrument, tuned not by human hands, but by the breath of the sea. A margin note says the harps calmed storms. How? The scribe does not explain, only writes, the tone soothed the sea. Perhaps superstition, perhaps not. For sound is power. You feel it even now in your chest as you whisper the words aloud. The idea that stone walls could sing the weather feels impossible, yet you cannot dismiss the quiet insistence of the record. Another hand, a later copyist, adds, "We have tried, but the strings of our age break." This line carries sorrow. They attempted to recreate the harps, but without the fibres, without the knowledge of the builders, the attempt failed. You lean back, closing your eyes. You can almost hear it, a low hum rising across the sea at dusk, the voices of the breaker walls calling out to fishermen still on the water. Not a song of entertainment, but of survival. A civilization that tuned stone and sea together, binding safety to harmony. And now silence. The harps are gone, the walls collapsed, the strings long vanished. Only the faint sketch remains, lines on vellum, whispering what once was. The ocean still roars, but the song is gone. You wonder if, somewhere beneath waves, a fragment still lies, waiting for wind to strike again, waiting to sing one last time to no one at all. The entry is brief, almost careless in its brevity, as though the scribe did not realize its weight. A tower that shone without fire, that is all the line says. Yet in the margin, another hand adds, "Stones set one upon another, glowing when touched by night." You pause. A lighthouse with no flame, guiding ships across dark waters, with light drawn not from burning oil, but from the very material of its walls. You try to picture it. A tall spire rising above cliffs, built from crystal or mineral unknown, each stone charged with the light of day and releasing it in darkness. At sunset, the tower would begin to glow, its surface shimmering with stored radiance. At night, it would blaze like a star fixed upon earth, guiding sailors from miles away. No smoke, no wick, no maintenance, only the steady, tireless light of stone. One description says, the glow shifted in colour. At dusk, soft gold. At midnight, blue-white, bright as moonlight. At dawn, it dimmed again. The builders, the record claims, placed mirrors within, angled so the light struck outward, reaching beyond the shore. Mariners trusted it more than stars, more than charts. It was called the Eternal Beacon. You turn the page, and a sketch reveals more. A spiral stair within, leading upward to a chamber where priests kept silent vigil. Not to tend a flame, but to watch the sea. Their duty was not to feed the light, but to witness it, to stand as guardians of knowledge older than their vows. The margin notes tell of its fall. The stones were taken, not broken, not lost taken, perhaps stolen, perhaps repurposed by those who saw only wealth in their glow. The tower fell dark. Its sight was buried, its memory smothered. You close the manuscript, yet in your mind you see the coastline glowing with its silent tower, light spilling across water like a blessing. A flame that never burned, a beacon that never faltered until men tore it apart. You realize the archive preserves more than secrets. It preserves mourning. Each entry is a fragment of grief for what was lost, for what was hidden, for what we no longer see. And in that grief, truth survives, glowing faintly, like a tower with no flame that still shines in memory. The manuscript you unroll is brittle, but its drawings are clear. Lines cut across a page, like threads of silver, straight and deliberate, stretching from one edge to the other. Beneath them, a sketch of a landscape marked by jagged peaks and vast sheets of ice. A single note, written in a monk's hesitant hand, explains, "These were roads, not of stone, but of light, hardened by cold. There is lot to do." You lean closer. The words seem absurd at first, roads of light, yet the description continues. In a land where sun barely rises and shadows stretch for months, there were paths that gleamed across frozen plains. They were not carved, nor laid with stone. They were formed by something unseen beams, directed and trapped, caught in the embrace of endless winter. The monks call them paths of frozen light, lines that shone faintly even in darkness, marking routes across wastelands no map records. Travellers wrote of walking upon them as though upon glass. The surface was smooth, unyielding, and never covered by snow. Even in storms, the paths remained clear, glowing faintly beneath the drifts. Some believed they were crafted by ancient builders, others that they were natural wonders, but the ledger insists they were built, deliberate, not chance. You imagine the polar silence, the wind howling across barren expanses, and there a glowing ribbon stretching to the horizon, a road not paved but summoned, a guide for wanderers in a world where stars were hidden by endless night. The notes describe caravans that followed these luminous lines, carrying goods from one forgotten settlement to another. The builders of these paths knew the secret of bending light, trapping it, hardening it with cold. Perhaps it was mineral, perhaps resonance, perhaps something beyond what science now admits. The monks who copied these records did not understand. Their words stumble, their drawings crude, but the awe is unmistakable. The final entry speaks with sorrow. The paths are broken, some calamity, some shift in the earth or sky, shattered the luminous roads. Now, the writer laments, the ice swallows all, and no traveller can find the way, yet the drawing glows faintly still under your lamp, as if the ink itself remembers. You close the manuscript slowly. The idea lingers, that across the farthest reaches of the north, there may still lie beneath snow and silence the remnants of roads, once made not of stone, but of frozen light, waiting to be walked again. The chamber is described in reverent detail. A circle of stone, walls curving inward, a dome rising above like the inside of an egg. It was called the Round Library. No shelves, no stacked volumes. Instead, spirals carved into the walls, filled with symbols. The text says, "Knowledge was not bound, but walked in circles." The records describe pilgrims entering barefoot, moving clockwise along the inner wall. As they walked, their fingers traced grooves, each spiral a line of script. The language was not alphabetic. It flowed in curves and swirls, shapes that echoed seashells and galaxies. Each mark carried meaning not only in form, but in rhythm, the pressure of touch, the pace of steps. The library was not read with eyes alone, it was read with the whole body. You imagine entering such a space. The silence heavy, broken only by the shuffle of feet, the walls glowing faintly from mineral veins in the stone. As you walk, your hand follows the spirals, and in the act of tracing, you learn. Knowledge becomes movement, memory becomes gesture. The monks who copied the account struggled to describe this. They drew crude spirals, added notes like circular letters, no start, no end. Some suspected it was not writing at all, but song captured in shape. The library, then, was both text and melody, both memory and prayer. A passage speaks of the centre where all spirals meet. At the heart of the chamber was a single stone, polished smooth. To stand there was to hear, in silence, the sum of all spirals at once. Pilgrims said they left the library not with facts, but with clarity, not with books, but with understanding carried in body and breath. The round library no longer stands. The notes speak of collapse, of stone cracked by frost, but fragments of the spirals were said to be salvaged, carried south, hidden in monasteries. You wonder if some remain even now, mistaken for decoration, carved into cloisters or chapels, their true meaning forgotten. As you close the record, you feel your finger unconsciously trace a small circle on the table. The round library whispers still. Knowledge is not always linear, not always written. Sometimes it is a circle, waiting for those who will walk and remember. The scroll unrolled before you is thin, fragile, but its drawings are bold. Ships, long and curved, but with no sails. Beneath them, waves are not drawn. Instead, lines of air, swirling currents, clouds beneath the hulls. The title given by the monk is simple: Skyboats of the Northern Dusk. The text tells of a people who lived where the sun never rose high, where twilight lingered for months. There, they built vessels not for sea, but for sky. Their boats were said to glide upon air, as others glide upon water, rising when winds shifted, descending when called by song. A chant, deep and resonant, controlled their lift. To outsiders, it was miracle. To them, it was craft. The records describe how these skyboats followed the path of the low sun, moving along horizons that glowed with endless dawn. Their journeys were measured not in miles, but in hours of twilight. A boat could carry traders from one frozen city to another in silence, gliding across cloud seas lit by orange light. You lean closer to a sketch, a vessel with curved wings like a gull, ropes hanging from its sides, passengers gazing down upon ice floes far below. The monks who preserved this could not comprehend it. One note scoffs, flights of fancy, surely allegory. Yet another hand, in smaller script, insists, they spoke of trade, they spoke of cargo, they spoke of stars followed from above the sea. The ledger mourns their disappearance. When the winds died, the boats fell. Some calamity, some shift in climate, robbed them of the breath they rode. Without wind, their craft became relics. The last mention says the boats were buried in ice caves, hidden until the world remembered how to call them back. You imagine it, the northern dusk stretching forever, boats gliding silently across horizons painted in gold and purple, a civilization moving not across oceans but skies, living in rhythm with winds, with chants that turned breath into lift. You close the scroll, but your heart lingers with the vision. The idea of skyboats is not absurd, it is memory. And in the silence of the archive, you almost hear it, the rush of air beneath hulls, the chant of voices rising into twilight, carrying vessels across the endless low Sunday. The ledger opens to a page stained with soot, though no candle has touched it for centuries. The writing is hurried, cramped, as if the monk feared the ink might be seized before it dried. The subject is simple, yet impossible. Hearths that burned with flames of blue, fed not by wood or oil, but by stones. You lean closer, tracing the careful sketches. Round chambers built into mountain walls, each with a central pit lined by dark rock. The flames rising are not drawn in the usual strokes of orange and red. Instead, the ink is pale, almost glowing, even now. A note says, "No smoke, no ash, heat without decay." The monks describe travellers who entered these halls after days in frozen wilderness. They expected cold stone, darkness, the usual misery of high peaks. Instead, they found warmth, a gentle, steady fire glowing in pits where no fuel burned. The stones themselves released heat when arranged in certain patterns. The builders had discovered how to awaken the hidden fire of the earth without destroying it. One account recalls a traveller who pressed his hand against the wall. The stone was warm, pulsing faintly, like the skin of a living creature. Another speaks of food cooked over blue fire, tasting of purity, free of smoke or soot. The people of the peaks believed the fire was a gift from the mountain itself, a reminder that earth holds its own heartlight. But the ledger does not only describe wonder, it also records fear. A note warns, to take the stones elsewhere is to silence them. They glow only where they belong. The fire was tied to place, to resonance with the mountain. To steal it was to kill it. Perhaps that is why the hearths disappeared. Perhaps greed silenced them, scattering the stones until their voices broke. You sit back, imagining a hall lit by steady blue flame, walls glowing with warmth, no smoke to choke the air, no ash to sweep away. A civilization living with fire that did not consume, heat that did not destroy, What would our world look like if such wisdom had endured? How many forests spared? How many cities freed from coal and smoke? The question lingers, unanswered, as the pages close upon the memory of the hearths of blue fire. The record begins with a single phrase: "They counted time by the whales." The script is steady, the tone reverent. You read on, the story unfolding slowly. Along a distant coast, a people watched the migrations of great whales, tracking not only their passage, but the songs they sang. The whales were their calendar, their teachers of time. Each season, the giants returned, their voices rolling through water and air alike. The people listened, mapping the changes. Low calls for winter, higher notes for spring, complex harmonies for summer, mournful tones for autumn. To them, the year was not measured by sun or moon, but by the chorus of the sea. The ledger describes rituals held on cliffs overlooking the water. Entire villages gathered to hear the first notes of arrival. Children repeated the sounds. Elders recorded them in memory and mark. Songs were carved into shells, each spiral holding patterns of tone. When whales leapt, their arcs were seen as signs. When they lingered, it meant abundance. When they passed swiftly, it meant famine. The ocean was not background, but scripture, read in voice and movement. The monks who copied these notes did not understand. They wrote dismissively, "Superstition of fishermen," yet the detail betrays truth. One margin lists years by whale song variations, noting floods, droughts, and storms that matched them. The whales were not myth, they were signal. The people had tuned themselves to a natural rhythm deeper than any clock. You imagine standing on those cliffs, the sea restless below, and hearing it, a vast note rising from deep water, vibrating through bone and air alike. A sound older than words, older than nations, marking the turning of time. To follow such a calendar is to live not by numbers, but by harmony. The last entry mourns silence. The whales ceased to return, no reason given. Perhaps climate shifted, perhaps hunters came, perhaps something more. Without the whales, the calendar broke. The people faded, their memory surviving only in these fragile lines. You close the book, but the sound remains. Even in silence, you hear it, the low, endless call of the whales, keeping time in a language forgotten by all but the sea. The manuscript begins with a sketch of dunes, curving and vast, swallowing all beneath them. Yet, beneath the waves of sand, the drawing reveals something startling. A city, roads laid in perfect lines, houses roofed in domes, courtyards marked by wells. The monk's hand trembles in the margin, buried whole, yet untouched. The record tells of travellers who, guided by shifting winds, stumbled into hollows where sand peeled back to reveal streets preserved as if the inhabitants had left only yesterday. Walls stood firm, painted still with pigments that resisted time. Doorways opened to chambers filled with pottery, tools, and cloth intact. Yet there were no bodies, no bones, only absence. The city had not died by violence. It had been swallowed by desert, gently but completely. The scribes describe markets, frozen midlife, stalls filled with jars, their lids sealed, looms still threaded, fountains dry but unbroken. The silence was immense, heavy with unfinished sentences. A people had walked away or vanished, leaving their city to be entombed by wind. You imagine stepping into such a place, sand crunching underfoot as you move through alleys perfectly preserved, shadows falling against walls painted in ochre and blue. The air dry, but carrying faint scents, trapped in jars, unopened for centuries. A city not ruined, but paused, waiting. The monks could not explain it. Some called it judgment, others miracle. One margin whispers, the builders knew. They left before the dunes rose. If true, then these were not disasters, but deliberate abandonments, a people yielding to desert, letting their cities sink into silence to preserve them for another age. The last note carries awe. streets intact beneath sand, as if the breath of time cannot touch them. The monks sealed the description, fearing others would seek to plunder. They feared the greed of kings, the hunger for artifacts. Better to let the cities sleep. You close the manuscript, heart racing. Somewhere beneath deserts, beneath dunes that shift with every wind, whole cities may still lie intact. Streets waiting, wells still sealed, walls painted with colours unknown. Not lost, not destroyed, hidden, waiting for the moment the sands choose to release them again. The parchment is faintly silvered, as though it once touched light and never forgot. The drawings show circles arranged in rows, not flat, but tilted. Their surfaces angled toward one another. The monk who copied them did not call them mirrors. He wrote only, "They borrowed the moon." You study the diagrams. Large discs mounted upon frames, polished to brilliance. At night, when the moon rose, these discs caught its light and passed it along, one to the next, until entire valleys glowed. The record says fields were watered under moonlight, not by buckets or channels, but by beams. The light was gathered, bent, concentrated, until dew formed upon leaves. Crops flourished, not under the sun, but beneath silver radiance carried through mirrors. The monks described lakes that shone without sun, villages bathed in gentle light, as though dawn lingered all night. The people worked their fields in coolness, guided not by fire but by moonbeams. They believed the moon itself was a living teacher, offering a softer rhythm than the harshness of the Sunday. Their mirrors were not merely tools, they were bridges between heaven and earth. One note describes rituals performed during full moon. At its highest, the mirrors aligned in perfect sequence, carrying a single beam across miles, striking a temple carved into cliff. There, the light ignited stones embedded in walls. These stones glowed for days, storing lunar fire to be used when night was dark. The temple became a lighthouse of silver flame, but the record carries warning. If the mirrors broke, the light fractured. When alignment was lost, beams scattered, burning fields instead of nourishing them. There are stories of villages scorched by their own moonlight, crops turned to ash by the very beams meant to sustain them, knowledge both gift and danger. The monks copied the designs cautiously. In margins they wrote, "Not to be built, too much power." They feared moon mirrors, feared what rulers might do with concentrated beams of light. Yet their awe shines through. You can almost hear them whispering, as though confessing wonder they dared not admit aloud, that there were once nights when valleys glowed like dawn, when moonlight itself was woven into survival. You close the parchment slowly. The thought lingers. The moon still shines, soft and indifferent. Yet somewhere, perhaps buried beneath ruins, mirrors sleep beneath sand or soil, waiting to awaken again, to bend silver light into rivers of life. The manuscript begins with puzzlement. The monk's first line reads, "Writing that appears when morning comes." You read further. A people once dwelled where desert met sea. Their script was not carved, nor inked, nor etched in stone. It was written with salt. At night, scribes dipped reeds into brine, drawing patterns upon stone slabs or smooth tiles. The marks dried invisible. To any eye, the surface was blank. But with dawn, when dew settled and the air softened, the salt rose, crystallizing into visible letters. For a few hours, words gleamed white against stone. By noon, they faded again, washed away by heat or gathered back into air. The writing lived only in morning light. You imagine such a city. Every dawn, streets filled with messages revealed by dew news, prayers, laws, even poems. People rose early not to beat the heat, but to read what had appeared overnight. Knowledge itself was fleeting, like breath upon glass, requiring constant renewal. The monks copied some of the symbols, clumsy lines attempting to capture forms that shifted each morning. They admit defeat. The script has no permanence, one notes. To understand, one must be present at dawn. Another confesses awe. Perhaps impermanence itself was their teaching. The record tells of walls inscribed with salt before great festivals. Entire murals invisible at night, revealed at first light as shimmering visions across the city. Stories written in crystal, read together by all, then gone by midday, memory became the only preservation. Children were trained not only to read, but to remember, to carry the words forward when the salt dissolved. A later copyist, skeptical, suggests this was metaphor. Writing on sand, fleeting as time. But the detail is too exact, the drawings too careful. You believe it. A civilization that wrote not to preserve forever, but to remind each day anew. The final line of the record lingers. Their truth could not be hoarded, it had to be lived. You close the manuscript, humbled. The salt script teaches even now that some wisdom shines only briefly, fragile as dew, precious because it fades. The vellum page shows tall structures rising across a desert plain. Columns, evenly spaced, hollow inside, each crowned with openings carved in careful angles. The monk's note reads, "They sang to the wind." The people built forests of stone where no trees grew. The wind rushed through, striking each pillar with different tones. Together, they formed vast instruments, entire landscapes turned into song. Travellers crossing these plains did not need maps. They followed the sound. Low tones for north, high for east. Melodies shifting with season and storm. The land itself guided them. The description grows richer. During festivals, the people gathered within the pillars, letting wind pour music over them. Some tones vibrated in bones, others whispered faintly like voices in dream. Priests said the pillars spoke the will of gods. Scholars believed they measured time, marking solstices and equinoxes through shifts in harmony. Farmers said the tones warned of storms long before they arrived. The monks struggled to describe it. They drew crude diagrams of openings, arrows for airflow. One confessed in margin, "I hear them, even as I write." Perhaps he had seen them. Perhaps the memory haunted him. But the pillars were fragile. Sandstorms wore them down. One record laments. Their voices broke. When the openings collapsed, harmony became noise. The people wept, for their guide and their song were gone. They abandoned the plain, leaving pillars to crumble in silence. You imagine it now, standing among towering columns, the desert wind weaving a vast, shifting symphony around you. Each step altering the chord, each gust reshaping the melody. A music not written, but breathed by earth itself. You close the manuscript, silence pressing heavy, yet in your ears, faintly, you still hear it. The song of wind through stone, guiding travellers across deserts, whispering truths now buried beneath sand. The folio you unfold is darker than others, its vellum tinged almost grey, as if weather itself had seeped into its fibres. The sketches are crude yet unmistakable, large monoliths set upright in open fields, each marked with hollow basins carved into their tops. The scribe's trembling Latin reads, "They captured the heavens." You lean close to the drawings. The stones were not altars, nor simple monuments. They were vessels. The basins carved into their crowns collected rain, but not only rain. The notes insist that under certain stars, the water shimmered differently, as though it absorbed more than light. "It drank the sky," the copyist writes. The water within turned to fire when touched. The descriptions grow stranger. Travellers reported that when dawn struck after heavy storms, the basins glowed faintly, the water within, holding reflections of stars no longer visible above. The people came to drink this water, believing it carried the strength of constellations. Priests anointed themselves with it before battles. Mothers offered it to newborns, whispering prayers that their children might inherit the sky itself. One passage describes a ritual. At midsummer, when the longest day ended, the people gathered around the stones at night. They lit no fires, made no sound. They waited for clouds to pass, for rain to fill the hollows. Then, in silence, they drank together, each lifting the sky water to their lips. It was not mere thirst they sought to quench. It was communion. They believed themselves to be swallowing pieces of eternity. The monks who copied these accounts were uneasy. One margin warns, sorcery disguised as sacrament. Another mutters, better forgotten. Yet, one careful hand, less fearful, wrote only, perhaps they understood what we have not. This disness das, the snoming see you, in the restids of mand, is not ratided. The records end abruptly. The stones are said to have cracked, their basins dry. Perhaps they were destroyed, perhaps abandoned. The scribe notes that rain still fell, but it no longer held the same fire. Whatever resonance once charged, the water had been lost. You close the folio slowly, the image lingering, fields of standing stones, basins of water glowing with starfire, a people drinking the heavens in silence. You wonder what it tasted like, what it felt like to swallow the night itself. The parchment you lift is lighter, frayed along one edge, as though it once brushed against water. The text begins abruptly, almost defiantly. There was a river that answered. No introduction, no explanation. The writer believes the reader should already know. You read on. Along a hidden valley, a river wound in sharp turns. Its surface restless, even in calm weather. The people called it the listener. They believed the water did not merely echo, but replied. The descriptions are vivid. When someone sang across its banks, the river responded with harmonies not their own. A voice shouted became a choir. A whisper became a song that lingered. The monks who recorded these stories doubted at first. One note sneers, superstition of echoes. Yet the detail grows too precise to ignore. The river's bends were angled with uncanny precision, its banks lined with stone cut deliberately. Natural echo would not explain the complexity of sound described. It was crafted, one monk admits reluctantly, an instrument of water. The rituals of the people centered on this river. Couples swore vows upon its banks, their promises sung back to them in voices stronger than their own. Children were named by it, their names shouted once, then returned in harmony as though approved by the valley itself. Leaders stood upon its stones and spoke, hearing the river multiply their words until the air quivered. You imagine it, standing at twilight by the listener, the air cool, water rushing, and then song. Not the simple trick of echo, but a voice twined with yours, lifting, carrying, answering. A dialogue between human breath and flowing current. The last entries are tinged with sorrow. The monks note that the river changed course after a great quake. The angles broke. The voice was lost. The people abandoned the valley soon after, mourning not land or harvest, but silence. They said the river no longer listened, no longer spoke. You close the parchment. Outside, rivers still run, their sound eternal. Yet you cannot help but wonder, was there once truly a river tuned like an instrument, shaped to speak back, carrying the voices of a people into harmony with itself? The silence of the archive offers no answer, but in your mind you hear faintly the rush of water that once replied. This record is different. The handwriting is steadier, slower, as though the scribe feared to misstep. The first line reads, "They did not bury their dead. They laid them down to wait." You study the description. Beneath grassy hills, chambers were carved in spirals, each lined with alcoves. Within them lay bodies not decomposed but preserved. Not embalmed, not mummified, but simply resting. The text insists, they slept, their faces soft, their skin unbroken. They did not rot. They breathed stillness. It is loft in the 5 debilitiate and the must thrive. The people of the hills believed death was not an end but a pause. They placed their kin in these chambers, not with grief but with expectation. Songs were sung to them nightly, carried down through shafts that opened to the sky. Offerings of food and flowers were laid at their feet, though none were ever consumed. They called them the the waiting. The monks who recorded these accounts were unsettled. One writes sharply, blasphemy, denial of resurrection. Another, more curious, asks, what preserved them so? The descriptions suggest a secret of air and stone. The chambers were carved of material that breathed, keeping perfect balance of damp and dry. Perhaps herbs lined the alcoves, perhaps minerals seeped from the rock, yet the tone of the record is clear. The people themselves believed it was choice. The waiting had decided not to decay. Travellers spoke of descending into these chambers, the air cool, heavy, fragrant with earth. They claimed to feel watched, as though the sleepers beneath the hill were not gone but listening. Some said their dreams were stirred, filled with faces that matched those lying in alcoves, a communion between waking and waiting. The final notes are filled with unease. The monks claim the chambers were sealed, covered in soil, erased from maps. They feared them, feared bodies that refused to wither, feared death that was not death. They wrote, better forgotten, lest men seek to sleep as gods. You close the record, breath slow. The image will not leave you, a hill in green countryside, quiet, unremarkable. Yet beneath it spirals of stone, where entire generations rest intact. Waiting, you wonder if even now some lie beneath earth, skin unbroken, eyes closed, not dead but simply paused, their silence deeper than time. The codex is thin, its edges blackened. When you open it, flakes fall, as if the manuscript itself is still smouldering centuries after its creation. The first line reads, they burned to preserve. The contradiction catches you. You read again. Yes, that is what it says. The people described in this record did not build libraries of parchment, nor carve inscriptions into stone. They gathered knowledge into ash. They burned their writings deliberately, not as destruction, but as transmutation. When texts were set aflame, the ashes were gathered, pressed into clay jars, and sealed beneath earth. The monks call it madness, yet their notes betray awe. The ash, when touched with water, released words in patterns upon its surface, ghostly letters, rising and fading. The codex explains, once a generation, elders unearthed the jars. They opened them in ritual, mixed the ashes with rain, and read what surfaced. The texts never reappeared in full, only fragments, proverbs, verses, instructions. The belief was that knowledge must not remain whole, that wisdom lived only in fragments, always requiring memory and community to bind it again. No one person could hold all. The ash itself was a safeguard. You imagine the ritual, a circle of elders, jars cracked open, ash poured into shallow bowls, rainwater dripping, mixing grey into black, and slowly, words shimmering to the surface, letters fading as quickly as they came. A living archive, fleeting and sacred, knowledge reborn only when called. The monks, baffled, called it sacrilege. One notes bitterly, better to bind parchment than waste it in flame. Yet another, more careful, writes, perhaps they feared conquest. What cannot be read cannot be stolen. The archive of ashes was not a library in the sense we know. It was protection. A civilization that believed forgetting was as important as remembering. The record ends with silence. The jars, it says, were smashed, their fragments buried deeper. No one knows where, perhaps by choice, perhaps by invaders who could not comprehend why someone would burn their own wisdom. You close the codex, your fingers stained faintly with soot, and realize the paradox. Sometimes, the surest way to preserve is to let go. The manuscript opens with a landscape unlike any you've read before. Not dunes of ordinary sand, but deserts of shimmering crystal. The scribe calls it the city that walked upon mirrors. You lean closer to the sketch. Streets paved with translucent grains, fused together into smooth sheets. Buildings carved from the same substance, glowing when struck by light. The city was built in a place where lightning struck endlessly. Storms rolled through valleys, burning sand into glass with every flash. The people learned not only to endure, but to harness this. They gathered shards, polished them, fused them into walls. Their city reflected sky and sun so brilliantly that from afar it looked like water, a mirage that fooled even the keenest traveller. By day, the streets blazed with reflected light, dazzling enough to blind enemies who approached. By night, the city glowed faintly under moon and star, each building a lantern. The glass was not fragile. The monks describe it as hard as steel, smooth as still water. The people cut it with tools of copper and stone, shaping it into arches and spires. One passage speaks of music. When wind passed through the city, the glass vibrated, producing tones that filled the air. The entire city became an instrument, singing softly at dusk, louder in storms. Residents believed it was the voice of their ancestors, the city itself alive. But such brilliance brought danger. Raiders sought shards to carry away. Scholars coveted knowledge of their craft. The city defended itself with the very desert that gave it life. Approaching armies were lured by mirages, misled by reflections, lost in endless glitter until they perished. Still, the record ends with loss. A great quake shattered the foundations. The city cracked, its mirrored streets splintered into dunes of glass once more. Travellers later found shards scattered across miles, fragments of walls buried in sand. They carried them home, never knowing they were once pieces of towers that sang. You close the manuscript, the lamplight catching faint shimmer in the ink. Somewhere, beneath desert heat, shards still lie broken mirrors of a city that once shone like captured lightning. The parchment is thin, nearly transparent, its script fading to near invisibility. Yet the words that remain are haunting. They sang, though none had voices. The account describes a hall deep underground. Its walls were curved, its ceiling domed, its floor set with stones cut in geometric patterns. But what filled it was not architecture alone, it was sound. When people entered, the chamber itself produced tones, not from instruments, not from singers, but from resonance. The space sang on its own. Travellers reported standing in silence as harmonies unfolded, layers of sound weaving through the air. Notes low enough to tremble in bone, high enough to shimmer like bells. No throats moved, no mouths opened. The choir came from stone. The monks who recorded this argued endlessly. One margin claims it was trickery of air. Another insists the stones themselves were tuned. The more careful scribe adds, this was no natural cave. It was built, every angle carved for song. The more careful scribe is that the people called it the chamber of breath. They believed the earth itself exhaled music through it. Ceremonies were held there in darkness. Entire communities gathered, bringing no instruments, no words. They simply stood, letting the chamber sing around them. Some said they felt lifted, as though walking above ground, though their feet did not move. Others claimed visions, seeing patterns of light in the air that matched the tones. The monks' account grows unsettled. They describe visitors who lingered too long in the chamber. These people returned, changed voices deeper, eyes brighter, movements slower but sure. Some never spoke again, communicating only with gestures and tones hummed in chest and throat. The monks labelled it dangerous. Yet even in warning, their words betray envy. The final line is chilling. The chamber is sealed. But still, when earth quakes, a tone escapes. You pause, imagining it, deep beneath soil, a hall still humming, waiting, its choir of stone voices continuing, though no one listens. You close the parchment, the silence of the archive pressing heavier than usual, and in that silence, faintly, you almost hear it a note without a singer, rising from earth itself, proof of a choir without throats. The manuscript you unroll smells faintly of dried herbs, though its vellum is centuries old. The script begins with a quiet assertion. There were gardens that bloomed only under stars. You pause, rereading, but the words are steady, not poetic. These were not metaphors. They were descriptions. The records describe vast terraces carved into a valley where sunlight rarely touched the ground. By day, the gardens appeared lifeless leaves curled tight, stems drooping as if withered. Travellers reported silence, no fragrance, no colour. But as dusk approached, the valley transformed. Flowers unfolded in unison, petals glowing faintly as if painted with moonlight. Colours no sun had ever revealed shimmered in the half-dark. Blues brighter than sky, reds deep as coals, whites that pulsed with silver radiance. The air filled with fragrance so dense it seemed tangible. Bees and moths swarmed in clouds, their wings catching starlight. Some species glowed themselves, their bodies streaking the night with lines of green fire. The valley became a world alive only when sun abandoned it. One monk, sceptical, wrote in margin, perhaps fantasy. Yet another hand added, no, there are seeds kept still. He described pods that, when broken open, released scents so sharp they lingered for days, seeds from plants that never woke by day, their entire rhythm bound to darkness. The people of the valley lived with this cycle. Their work was nocturnal. They harvested under moonlight, their songs blending with insect hum and flower fragrance. Their bodies adjusted to this inversion. By day, they slept in cool caves. By night, they thrived, clothed in woven petals that shimmered faintly even after plucking. They called themselves children of the night bloom. The monks copying this record feared its implications. They worship darkness, one accused. But another line, softer, confesses, perhaps they worship not dark, but hidden light. The gardens eventually withered when climate shifted, when rivers feeding the valley dried. Seeds remained, scattered, hidden. A note suggests some were taken into monasteries. Perhaps they sleep still, waiting for conditions to call them back. You close the manuscript, imagining walking through a valley that only awakens at night. The fragrance pressing close, the colours unseen by sun dazzling in silver glow, the hum of life woven into darkness. Gardens that slept by day, teaching that not all growth belongs to light. The folio is thicker, heavy with marginalia, as if monks argued over every line. The first passage is simple. They built walls that did not forget. The city described had no scribes in the sense we know. Instead, its builders constructed vast walls of a strange porous stone. These walls, the records insist, absorbed sound. When people spoke, when choirs sang, when leaders proclaimed, the vibrations entered the stone itself. Days later, anyone passing could press an ear to the wall and hear fragments. Not echoes, but recordings, voices of the past, captured and replayed. The monks debated furiously. One calls it impossible trickery. Another compares it to shells that carry sea sound. But the detail cannot be dismissed. Entire archives of spoken word existed not on parchment but in stone. A child might hear ancestors simply by leaning close. Laws were remembered not by ink but by walls repeating them. The rituals of the city depended upon this. On feast days, choirs sang into the walls at dawn. Their songs replayed each evening, the stone itself acting as chorus. Judges delivered sentences aloud, ensuring the walls held justice for future ears. Lovers whispered vows into hidden alcoves, returning years later to hear their younger selves. One monk records a chilling story. After conquest, invaders destroyed much of the city. Yet the walls spoke still. They whispered in voices of those slain, repeating defiance long after throats were silenced. The conquerors tried to shatter them, but fragments continued to murmur. Stone cannot be silenced, the margin warns. You imagine such a place, walking through ruins, wind-stirring dust, and then faintly, from cracked stone, the sound of voices, songs, laughter. a city alive not in body but in memory. The final note is uncertain. The walls decay, their memory fades, but some fragments still speak. Perhaps even now, beneath layers of earth, broken walls hum with forgotten voices, waiting for someone to listen. You close the folio, your ear ringing faintly as though stone itself whispered. The codex here is filled with diagrams, tall, slender towers drawn against circles of sun and arcs of moon. The scribe writes, "They ruled time by shadows, more precise than any clock. We yid de self is the do." You study the sketches, towers built of smooth stone, rising higher than trees, each surrounded by concentric rings marked with symbols. At dawn, shadows stretched across the outer rings. At noon, they contracted toward the center. At dusk, they aligned again with marks opposite. The towers turned sunlight into measure, dividing days into fragments finer than hours. But the records described more. Not only days, but seasons, years, even centuries were tracked. The towers cast shadows differently at solstice and equinox. The builders marked these shifts, creating calendars carved into earth itself. They knew precisely when rains would come, when tides would swell, when harvest would be richest. They even predicted eclipses, shadows vanishing altogether as if swallowed by sky. The monks copied reluctantly, muttering that such precision belonged only to divine order. Yet their admiration bleeds through. They counted not merely time, but fate, one wrote. Another whispered, "Too much knowledge brings pride." The people of the towers did not fear time. They shaped life around its rhythm. Weddings held only when shadow reached certain points. Battles delayed until noon, cast lines across specific markers. Children named on days when shadows curved in rare patterns. Time itself became sacred text, read not in parchment but in light upon stone. Invaders, unable to read this language, toppled many towers, but fragments remain. Some lie buried beneath villages, mistaken for ordinary ruins, yet in certain deserts, lone pillars still stand. Travellers report their shadows striking ground in ways too exact to be chance. You close the codex, imagining sunlight bending across ancient stone, shadows moving with precision, telling truths forgotten by modern calendars. Towers that measured shadows, civilizations that trusted light itself as teacher. The parchment is speckled with faint silver dots, as if flecks of light were caught in the vellum itself. The opening line is short, certain. They drew not water, but heavens. The manuscript describes wells, unlike any other. Dug deep into the earth, their mouths were narrow, their shafts lined with polished stone. Travellers who leaned over their rims at night saw not water, but stars. The reflection was too perfect, too vast. Some claimed to see constellations not visible in the sky above, constellations that belonged to another hemisphere, or perhaps another age. The wells did not mirror, they revealed. The people called them eyes of earth. They believed the planet itself was alive, and these wells were its vision. To gaze into them was to see the memory of the cosmos, the stars carried within the stone of the world. Elders taught that each star visible in the wells spoke of a path or a destiny. Those seeking guidance threw pebbles into the depths, watching which constellation shattered, and took this as sign of their fate. The monks argued in the margins. One scoffed, "Illusion." Reflection bent by curved stone. Another warned, "Do not mock what you do not understand." One scribe, braver, described an experience firsthand. "I saw stars where the sky above was clouded. I saw light moving where no water stirred." His note is hurried, unfinished, as though he feared what he had confessed. The wells served more than ritual. Farmers used them to mark planting, noting how certain star patterns appeared only when soil was ready. Sailors studied them before voyages, trusting the earth's eyes more than shifting skies. Children were taught to memorize constellations through the wells before they ever learned them in the heavens above. The record mourns their loss. The shafts collapsed, or were filled deliberately with stone, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of envy. The monks whisper, "Better buried than misused." You close the parchment, but when you do, you feel as though you have peered into one of those wells yourself. In your mind's eye, you see stars shimmering deep within Earth, as though the planet remembers a sky older than time, waiting for those who dare to look down instead of up. The folio is thick, its edges dark with soot. The script begins with awe. "Once each year," the mountain answered. The record tells of a peak shrouded in mist, its summit hidden more often than revealed. The people at its base believed it was alive, a guardian older than their memory. Most of the year, the mountain lay silent, but on one night, when winter ended and spring began, it roared, not in eruption, not in quake, but in voice. Travellers described the sound as neither thunder nor wind. It was a tone deep and resonant, shaking soil, rattling stone, yet strangely harmonious. It carried for miles, heard not only in ears but in bones. The people gathered when the night came, waiting in silence. At the appointed hour, the tone would rise, steady, unbroken, lasting the span of a breath or the span of a song. Then it faded, and the mountain slept again. The monks who copied this account were skeptical. One wrote, "Perhaps venting gas." Another insisted, "But why only once each year on the same night?" The rhythm defied accident. The people called the tone the renewal. They believed the mountain's voice cleansed them, driving sickness away, strengthening soil, calming rivers. They timed planting to its roar, believing seeds set afterward carried the blessing of the peak. Children born near the night were considered destined for greatness. Leaders spoke decisions aloud as the mountain sounded, believing their words carried into its core. One chilling entry records the mountain's silence. A year came when it did not speak. Panic spread. Crops failed. Rivers swelled. Sickness grew. The people believed the mountain had turned its face away. In desperation, they offered gifts, grain, animals, even lives. But the silence endured. They abandoned the valley, leaving the mountain to its own sleep. The monks closed the entry with unease. If mountains speak, what else have we not heard? You lean back, the sound echoing in your imagination. A tone deep as earth, steady as eternity, rising once a year to remind humanity that land itself has voice. And you wonder, does the mountain still speak, hidden from us only by our refusal to listen? The manuscript here is fragile, its ink smudged as though touched by damp fingers long ago. The first line is astonishing. They crossed not only men, but thought. The records describe bridges unlike any ever built. Stretching across canyons and rivers, they were woven not of wood or stone alone, but of fibres said to shimmer when moonlight struck. Travellers who crossed these bridges reported more than safe passage. They claimed dreams followed them. The people believed the bridges were living conduits. When one slept after crossing, visions came unbidden, dreams of lands never seen, of faces unknown, of wisdom waiting elsewhere. Sometimes these dreams revealed harvests to come, storms approaching, journeys worth taking. Sometimes they carried sorrow, warnings, even glimpses of death. But always they carried something. To cross the bridge was to open oneself to a current larger than self. The monks who copied these tales scoffed, but one note confesses, "I too dreamed." He describes crossing a fragment of such a bridge, found half buried. That night, he dreamed of his mother, long dead, speaking words he had forgotten. He woke weeping, then refused to write more. The bridges shaped the lives of those who built them. Merchants timed journeys, not only for trade, but for dreams. Lovers crossed together, believing shared dreams bound their souls. Leaders crossed before great decisions, seeking counsel in visions. Children were forbidden until initiation, lest their minds be overwhelmed. But the bridges decayed, fibres frayed, rivers rose, storms tore them apart. The last entry is mournful. The dreams do not cross where no bridge remains. Without them, the people lost not only safe passage, but the visions that had guided them. You close the manuscript, heart heavy. The idea lingers, bridges that carried more than bodies, that wove dreams across canyons, making every crossing a communion with mystery. Now gone, leaving only ordinary stone spans, carrying nothing but footsteps. The folio opens with sketches that shimmer faintly under your lamplight, the pigment mixed with powdered mineral that reflects as though it carries frost within. The first words are simple, matter of fact. Here the ice did not yield. The record describes a circle high in the mountains, a ring carved into stone and filled not with water, but with a block of ice that never melted. Summer came, snow vanished, rivers swelled, but the ice remained clear, solid, eternal. Travellers touched it, expecting cold. Instead, they felt warmth, not heat, but a steady pulse, like the breath of a living creature. Some claimed it sang, a low hum audible only when pressed close. The people called it the heart of winter. They believed the circle was a covenant, a promise that the world would endure no matter how seasons shifted. Couples pledged vows there, swearing by the permanence of the ice. Warriors sought blessing before battle, laying blades upon its surface and claiming strength from its stillness. Elders taught that when the circle cracked, the end would follow swiftly after. The monks who copied this description hesitated. One wrote sharply, superstition. Another, in smaller hand, noted, but if true, then why warm to the touch? Their arguments fill margins, betraying unease. They wanted dismissal, but found themselves tangled in fascination. A fragment of text tells of strangers who attempted to cut the ice. They struck with iron, but blades shattered. They tried fire, but flames hissed and died. In desperation, they hauled away chunks chipped from edges, carrying them down to valleys. Within days, the fragments melted, ordinary and lifeless. Only within the circle did the ice resist time. The record ends in lament. A quake shook the mountain. The circle split. When travellers returned, the ice was gone. The monks copied this with relief, whispering that God had shattered pagan illusion. Yet their script falters, strokes uneven, as if they themselves doubted. You close the folio, imagining a ring of frost high in stone, unmoving, untouched, holding the memory of winters long vanished. A circle that defied sun, fire, and hand alike, an anchor of permanence in a world that never ceases to change. The parchment you open is warped, water-stained, edges curled inward like petals of a drowned flower. Across the top, the scribe has scrawled, a library no fire can touch. The account describes a settlement built beside a vast, deep lake. At its centre lay a structure unlike any temple or palace. It was submerged, its entrance reached only by descending through a shaft carved in stone, plunging below surface. Within, chambers spread outward, their walls lined with tablets sealed in resin, each preserved by the water that surrounded them. The monks, incredulous, described it as madness, words where no hand may reach, but the people called it their greatest treasure. The library beneath the lake was not meant for daily use. Its texts were not opened or read by all. Instead, scribes memorized portions, passing them down orally, while the originals slept underwater, safe from flame, safe from conquest. When drought lowered the lake, priests descended and retrieved tablets temporarily, teaching anew what was at risk of being forgotten. Then they returned them, sealing again in silence. Travellers wrote of watching divers vanish into water, surfacing minutes later with resin-sealed slabs. They spoke of ceremonies held on shores, where knowledge returned briefly to daylight. Some described the tablets glowing faintly, resin catching sunlight as though the lake itself blessed them. The monks struggled. One note protests, Ink cannot survive water. Yet another margin adds, perhaps resin held them safe. The contradiction gnawed at them. To admit possibility was to admit ignorance. The record ends with a disaster. A flood greater than any before swept into the valley, raising the lake to heights unseen. The shaft vanished beneath depths too great to reach. The people fled, leaving the library entombed. The monks copied with satisfaction, calling it God's judgment. Yet their script betrays envy. If true, then countless words sleep still. You close the parchment, picturing a vast library slumbering beneath dark waters, safe from centuries of flame, waiting for hands brave enough or desperate enough to dive again. Knowledge drowned, yet not destroyed. Perhaps even now, beneath silent ripples, tablets lie stacked, holding words no eye has read for 1,000 years. The codex is smaller, margins crowded with irritated notes, as if monks wrestled with what they found. The first line is accusatory. They turned from the Sunday. The record tells of a temple unlike any other. Built upon a high plateau, its entrance did not face east to greet dawn, nor west to salute sunset. Instead, it faced north, toward cold, toward darkness, toward stars. The people who built it worshipped not the rising light, but the constancy of heavens that never set. Travellers described entering halls where pillars aligned not with solstices but with circumpolar constellations. At night, openings in the roof framed stars that circled endlessly, never dipping below horizon. The people called them the Watchers, symbols of eternity. They believed sun was fleeting, a daily death and rebirth, but northern stars were eternal guardians. The monks condemned this orientation. One margin fumes, blasphemy. To reject the sun is to reject God. Yet another note is quieter, but their reasoning is sound. What never sets must indeed seem divine. Rituals inside the temple centered on stillness. Worshippers sat in silence, staring upward as stars wheeled slowly above. They believed by aligning breath with that motionless circle, they touched permanence. Unlike other cultures that marked time by sun's rise and fall, these people sought refuge in what did not change. The record mourns their end. Invaders burned villages, but the temple stood unburned. It was abandoned, its stones cold, its orientation misunderstood. Later generations mistook it for error, believing builders incompetent for ignoring the East. Only the archive remembers. It was not mistake, it was choice. You close the codex, imagining the plateau, winds cutting sharp, the temple opening northward. You see worshippers seated in darkness, not awaiting dawn but gazing into endless night, trusting stars that never leave. A temple that faced the wrong way, or perhaps the only right way, for those who sought eternity instead of fleeting light. The manuscript begins with hesitation. The first line has been written, erased, then written again, the ink heavier from repetition. They built a gate that cast no stone, only shadow. You trace the drawing. It shows an arch rising against blank space, but the details are wrong. The pillars are thin, insubstantial. The keystone above is nothing more than a curve of ink. The notes in the margin explain, no masonry, no wood, a shape cut into light. The people described believed in thresholds, not of walls, but of absence. At dusk, when the sun fell at a certain angle, the shadow of two standing stones met in the air, forming a doorway darker than any around it. Travellers who stepped through spoke of strange sensations, air thicker, time slower, dreams more vivid afterward. Some claimed to emerge hours later, though only moments had passed for those waiting outside. Others crossed once and were never seen again. The monks were unsettled. One called it sorcery, another illusion. Yet they recorded accounts too consistent to dismiss. Children walked through laughing, one entry says, and returned speaking of gardens unseen. Merchants described visions of lands they later found in waking journeys. Warriors swore they met ancestors within. The gate existed only briefly, during twilight, when the angle of light cut the shadow into perfection. By nightfall, it vanished. By morning, only stones remained, meaningless without Sunday. The people called it the Passage of Unlight. They built festivals around it, gathering each season to cross, to seek guidance in the shadow. The record ends in silence. The stones were toppled, dragged away. Without them, no shadow could form. The monks copied with relief, writing, "Better lost." Yet one trembling note remains at the edge of the page. What if the gate was never theirs, but the world's? You close the manuscript slowly. In your mind you see the arch not built, but formed from light's absence, a threshold of shadow waiting for the right hour. Perhaps still waiting, somewhere, in a forgotten field where two stones once stood, yearning for the angle that would open the way. The folio here is rough, written in hurried strokes, as though copied reluctantly. The title scrawled at its top reads, "The Houses That Did Not Stay." The record describes a people who never abandoned their homes, even when the land failed them. Their dwellings were not fixed to soil. They were built of frames bound by bone and reed, lifted by levers and poles, and carried in unison. Entire families, even villages, marched together, their houses swaying on shoulders, crossing plains and rivers alike. At night, they set the houses down in circles. Within hours, it looked like a permanent settlement, with streets, courtyards, and fire pits. By dawn, the homes lifted again, walking with the people as though alive. Children played in doorways, even as men carried the frames. Elders rode inside, undisturbed. The monks who copied this account were baffled. One dismissed it as exaggeration. Another admitted envy. If true, they never knew ruin. The idea unsettled them. Homes that followed, never left behind, never lost. The people believed their houses carried spirits of ancestors. To abandon a dwelling was to abandon blood, so they crafted dwellings that could move with them, shelters and sanctuaries tied to their backs, hearts and hands. Storms broke fields, floods swallowed valleys, enemies burned crops, but never could they burn the people's homes. Travellers described the sight of a migration, dozens of houses swaying across plains, roofs glittering with woven reeds, frames creaking like animals breathing. From afar, it seemed as though the houses themselves had grown legs, walking faithfully beside their people. The record mourns their disappearance. One scribe suggests iron made them obsolete, heavier structures rose, rooted to earth, and the moving houses were abandoned. Another wonders if they still wander, unseen, in remote plains. You close the folio, picturing houses walking like companions, never static, never forsaken. A people who carried not only food and tools, but entire dwellings, their homes always by their side. You wonder what it would feel like, never to leave a house behind, never to know the silence of an empty home. The manuscript here is cleaner, the ink deliberate. The first line is chilling in its calm. They kept time without timekeepers. The account describes a city that built no clocks, no sundials, no bells, yet its people moved in harmony, as though guided by a rhythm unseen. The monks struggled to describe it. They called it a clock with no hands. The heart of the city was a plaza. At its centre stood a structure of concentric rings, each carved with grooves and lines. By day, light filled the grooves, bending into shifting patterns. By night, the grooves caught moonlight and starlight, glowing faintly with minerals embedded within. Citizens gathered at the plaza, not to watch the time, but to feel it. The shifting light across grooves seemed to strike their bodies, as sound does an ear. They left knowing when to sow, when to harvest, when to gather, when to rest. Travellers said no orders were given, yet the people acted as one. Fields were planted together, markets opened together, feasts began without word or bell. Strangers marvelled. How do they know? The answer was always the same. The centre tells us. The monks debated fiercely. One dismissed it as superstition. Another confessed, I stood in the plaza and felt it, a rhythm not of sun, not of moon, but of something deeper. His margin ends abruptly, ink blotched, as if he feared his own admission. The city's harmony bred envy. Invaders destroyed the plaza, scattering stones, breaking grooves. Without it, the people lost their rhythm. Markets faltered, fields failed. The city declined swiftly. Some fled, others stayed, but the balance was gone. The monks copied their fall with satisfaction, writing, "Only God may order time." Yet the thought lingers as you close the manuscript. A clock with no hands, no numbers, no sound, only grooves of stone that carried rhythm directly into human hearts. You wonder what it would feel like to live in such harmony, to rise and rest not by machines, but by the pulse of the world itself. The manuscript is bright where others are dark, its ink flecked with faint colours that have somehow resisted time. Across the margin, the scribe has scrawled, "They fed upon visions." Then, "Itso continuals inter rebreti ue on the most." The record speaks of a river unlike any other. It wound through a valley of cliffs marked with pigments that bled into water. Minerals from red stone, blue clay, and yellow dust washed down into the current, staining it with hues that shimmered as the sun struck. The fish that swam within absorbed these colours into their scales. Some glowed crimson, others cobalt, still others shone with green so luminous they seemed carved of emerald. The people who lived there believed each fish carried not only colour, but memory. Travellers described festivals where villagers cast nets and drew in shimmering catches. They roasted the fish carefully, then ate with reverence. To them, to consume the painted fish was to consume stories, to take into one's body the pigments of earth and the visions of ancestors. After feasts, dreams came vivid and precise. A child might dream of distant places they had never seen. Elders dreamed of ancestors long gone, whose voices spoke with clarity. The river was their oracle, its painted fish messengers between world and flesh. The monks copied uneasily. One wrote, "Hallucinations, madness of minerals." Yet another admitted, "Their dreams gave truth. A merchant dreamed of flood, and flood came. A farmer dreamed of famine, and famine came. Their visions were not folly. The people told stories of one particular fish, pale silver, with streaks of red and blue, that was believed to appear only once each generation. Whoever caught and ate it would see beyond time, into the fate of the entire people. Records say a young woman once consumed it and spoke of enemies long before they came, guiding her people to safety. Another time, an elder warned of storms years ahead, saving the harvest. But the river changed. One year, the colours faded, the pigments ceased to flow from cliffs, fish returned dull, ordinary, stripped of brilliance. The dreams ended. Without visions, the people scattered. The monks recorded with satisfaction, false oracles die. Yet their script trembles, as if even they missed the beauty of painted scales. You close the manuscript, imagining a river glimmering with living jewels, scales flickering in light like stained glass moving with current. Fish not merely sustenance, but prophecy, eaten so that visions might walk in flesh. The river of painted fish now gone, perhaps, but not forgotten in the silence of vellum. The codex is thin, the parchment brittle, but its writing is deliberate. The first line is stark. They lit flames without firewood, and the sky remained clear. The record describes a people who discovered fire that consumed nothing. Their hearths glowed with orange and gold, yet gave off no smoke, no ash. Travellers described seeing their villages at night, rooftops lit with steady flames that flickered like torches but produced no haze. They called it the clean fire. The people said it was not fire at all, but breath of earth. They found stones deep in caverns, veins that pulsed with warmth. When struck together, sparks leapt that clung to air and grew into flame. Once lit, the fire required no fuel. It simply burned, steady, until it was smothered by earth or drowned in water. They carried these sparks in clay jars, lighting new hearths without tinder. The clean fire was considered sacred. It was placed in temples, guarded day and night, never allowed to die. The monks recorded this with suspicion. One wrote, "Demon's trick. Fire cannot live without fuel." Yet another, more cautious, suggested, "Perhaps gas from earth, unknown to us." Still, the ore bleeds through. No chimney smoked, no ash dirtied their hands. The fire shaped their lives. Crops dried faster, food cooked pure, untainted by soot. Healers warmed stones in the flames and pressed them to wounds, claiming they healed quicker. Children were taught to bow before the fire, whispering thanks for warmth without cost. Their nights glowed brighter than any village around them. But envy brought danger. Other tribes sought to steal the secret. Wars erupted over caverns. The clean fire was hoarded, hidden, then lost when caverns collapsed in quake. The people scattered, carrying fragments of memory, but never again the source. The monks closed their entry with relief. Better lost. Man must struggle for warmth. Yet the tone betrays longing. They feared what they could not control, but secretly wished to sit before such clean flame. You close the codex, and your lamp flickers as though mocking you. You picture villages glowing in clear night air, flames dancing without smoke, warmth without waste, fire that left no mark, no scar, except memory of what once was. The manuscript you unroll is crowded with sketches, more images than words. Across the pages, the scribe has drawn birds carved from stone wings outstretched, talons sharp, beaks open in eternal cry. Beneath, he has written, "They did not perch. They flew without moving." The record speaks of a civilization that filled its cliffs with statues of birds, so lifelike that travellers swore they shifted when clouds passed. The carvings were vast, some larger than houses, their wings spanning across valleys. They were not decoration, they were guardians. The people believed these stone birds protected their skies, watching the horizon, keeping storms and invaders at bay. At equinox, when sun struck at perfect angle, the statues cast shadows across entire villages. Elders said the birds were spreading wings over people, sheltering them. Children slept beneath the shadows, believing no harm could come, while stone wings covered them. Merchants reported feeling calmer when passing beneath, as if fear itself could not cross into the villages. The monks argued, one margin dismisses them as idols. Another mutters, too many to be only art. Some drawings show strange grooves along wings, as though hollow channels ran inside. One monk speculated that when wind struck, the statues might have sung, their hollow forms echoing like flutes. If true, the valleys once filled not only with shadows, but with songs of stone birds calling to the sky. The record ends with sorrow. A storm greater than any before struck lightning-cleaving cliffs. Many birds fell, shattered upon rocks. The people wept, saying their guardians had been slain. Without them, fear returned, and within years the settlements dwindled. Travellers later found fragments buried, wings broken, heads lost. The monks copied the tale reluctantly, but one wrote in small script, "I saw one, still standing, still watching." No location given, no further description, only the confession. You close the manuscript, your breath slow. You imagine cliffs alive with vast birds of stone, wings stretched across valleys, their presence heavy as mountains. Guardians who never moved, yet always watched, whose shadows and perhaps even songs kept fear at bay. Stone birds that guarded sky, reminding that protection need not move to be real. The manuscript is heavier than the others, as though the ink itself had thickened with minerals. The first line is quiet, almost reverent. There was a place where trees grew fruit of light. The record speaks of an orchard that stood in a desert valley. Its trees were twisted, silver-barked, their leaves thin and shimmering like mica. From their branches hung fruit that was not flesh but crystal, globes clear as water, Others tinted rose, amber, or green. By day they caught sunlight and glowed faintly. Travellers told of wandering into the orchard at dusk and finding the valley filled with orbs of light dangling like lanterns. Entire paths illuminated, each step guided by luminous fruit. When picked, the fruit was heavy and cool to the touch. Cracked open, it revealed liquid inside sweet, sharp, unlike any water or wine. Those who drank swore they dreamed of stars, of skies filled with unfamiliar constellations. Some claimed to wake with knowledge they had never learned. The monks argued over the account. One dismissed it outright, fantasy of gemstones. Another was less certain. If trees draw water from stone, why not crystal from root? They copied the sketches nonetheless, showing branches bent beneath translucent orbs. The people of the orchard built their lives around it. Fruit was harvested not for hunger, but for vision. Priests drank before rituals, speaking prophecies to guide the village. Couples shared one orb before marriage, believing it bound their dreams together. Children were given only the smallest fruit, lest their minds be overwhelmed. But the orchard faded. The record tells of drought deeper than any before. Roots withered, branches broke. The last crystal fruits turned cloudy, then cracked and fell to dust. The valley was left barren, the silver trees standing like bones. The monks copied with satisfaction, "Stone cannot feed man." Yet one trembling note in the margin remains. But perhaps vision is also sustenance. You close the manuscript, picturing a valley glowing at night with fruit that lit paths, knowledge hanging like lanterns from branches. An orchard that bore glass fruit, fragile, luminous, forever lost except in memory. The parchment here is torn, as if even the act of writing unsettled the scribe. Across the first line, the ink blots, the hand uncertain. They built a tower that did not fall down, but rose into sky. The record tells of a structure unlike any other. It began like a ziggurat, stone upon stone, each layer narrowing as it reached higher. Yet the stones themselves were light, quarried from a mountain that hummed faintly when struck. Builders set them carefully, fitting edges so precise no blade of grass could slide between. As the tower rose, travellers claimed it grew unstable, but instead of crumbling downward, it lifted. Blocks tore free from ground and drifted upward, hovering, then stacking again above. The monks wrestled with the idea. One scrawled angrily, "Nonsense. Stones are earth. They obey gravity." But another hand admits unease. What if these stones obeyed another law? The people worshipped the tower as stairway. They believed it was a path for souls, a ladder into realms beyond clouds. At equinox, priests ascended, climbing steps that shifted beneath them, each block floating higher as they passed. Some returned, speaking of visions of stars close enough to touch. Others did not. Their absence was not considered loss, but triumph. They had ascended, chosen by the tower. The tower eventually dissolved. The record says its stones drifted higher, one by one, until only the base remained. Some fragments fell elsewhere, discovered by travellers who swore they still hummed when struck. The monks copied the tale with frustration, leaving many blank spaces. One note says only, "If it rose into sky, then perhaps it still rises." You close the parchment, the image lingering, a tower unbuilt by its own ascent, stone by stone drifting upward until nothing remained but open air. A tower that fell not down, but up, perhaps still climbing, unseen above the clouds. The codex here is different. Its margins are smooth, its text careful, as though the scribe himself lingered longer in fascination than fear. The first line is simple. Their walls were fabric, and their city spoke when wind came. The record describes a city that did not build of stone or brick. Instead, they wove cloth from reeds and bark, stronger than leather, lighter than wool. They stretched these fabrics across wooden frames, binding them into walls that shifted with breeze. In stillness, the city was silent, but when wind passed, the cloths whispered. Each alley hummed differently, each home murmured its own tone. Travellers described walking through streets alive with voices not human but woven. The people of the city claimed these sounds carried memory. Cloth preserved whispers of all who lived there. A wall might murmur with laughter long gone. A curtain might sigh with prayers spoken years before. Children pressed their ears to fabric and swore they heard ancestors speak. The monks recoiled. One wrote, "Idols of wind." Another confessed curiosity. If cloth remembers, is it not archive? Their sketches show vast banners stretching between houses, swaying in gusts like sails of ships, each shifting sound a line of living history. The people tended their fabric as others tend stone. They rewove when threads frayed, but never replaced entirely, for to lose a piece was to lose its voice. Entire families passed down walls of cloth, cherishing them as others cherish books. The record mourns their end. A fire swept the city, devouring fabric in hours. Survivors claimed the wind itself screamed as walls burned, voices of ancestors vanishing in smoke. They rebuilt, but with stone this time. The whispers never returned. The monks copied the account with unease, but one note remains, faint. Perhaps fabric remembers more than parchment. You close the codex, imagining streets alive with murmurs, walls sighing when wind passed, voices lingering in woven threads. A city of whispering cloth, lost in fire, its memory now only in brittle pages. The parchment here is faint, the ink nearly erased, but the words that remain thrum with unease. The first line is stark, almost trembling. Their music was made where no breath lived. The record tells of caverns deep underground, where air thinned until flame would not catch, and yet songs were born. The people carved chambers smooth as glass, each wall curved with precision. When they entered, they carried no flutes, no drums, no strings. They simply stood in silence. Slowly, the chamber itself began to hum. Tones rose unbidden from the stone, weaving together into chords that grew louder as more bodies entered. Travellers swore the sound did not come from mouths or instruments, but from the walls. Some said their own bones vibrated until they could not tell if the chamber sang or they did. The monks copied this reluctantly, one writing in disgust, a trick of echoes. But another note insists, I too felt the tone within my chest. The people believed the chambers were lungs of the earth. They gathered within not to speak, but to listen. Rituals of healing were held there. The sick lay in the centre, while the tones swelled around them, vibrating through flesh and marrow. Some recovered, claiming the stone song drove illness away. Others did not, but their bodies were left in the chamber, so their spirits might dissolve into the eternal chord. The monks feared this deeply. They saw it as blasphemy salvation not through prayer, but through resonance. Yet even in their condemnation they recorded that the tones left them unsettled. One writes, "It followed me for days. I heard the hum even in sleep." The chambers eventually collapsed. Tremors shook ceilings, cutting off passages. Survivors wept, saying the lungs of earth had stopped breathing. The monks copied this with relief, noting, "Silence restored." But the record ends with a whisper of doubt. Perhaps not silence, perhaps only deeper. The record end sighs, sent in pursing attentive. You close the parchment, ears ringing faintly in your own silence, as though some resonance has followed across centuries. You wonder what it would be to stand in such a chamber, breathless yet filled with song that belongs not to humans, but to stone itself. The manuscript is dark, with smudges of green pigment, long faded but still faintly visible. Across the top, the scribe has written, "They crossed rivers, not by stone, but by life." The record tells of a people who never built bridges with timber or brick. Instead, they planted trees along riverbanks, coaxing their roots to stretch and knot across waters. They tended these roots for generations, weaving them patiently until they formed arches strong enough to carry whole caravans. The bridges did not rot or weaken, for they were alive. Leaves sprouted overhead, branches entwining to create shaded canopies. Travellers described walking across green tunnels, cool and damp, the river rushing beneath, the air alive with scent of earth. The monks wrote with astonishment, though begrudging. One note admits, "This is no sorcery. This is patience." Another, less generous, scrawls, "An insult to stone craft." Yet their sketches reveal fascination arches drawn in precise detail, route by route. The people saw these bridges as sacred. To cross was not merely to travel, but to trust living beings. They whispered blessings before stepping upon them, thanking the trees for carrying weight. Weddings were held atop them, couples standing in green light as roots trembled beneath, symbolizing unity. Children played along edges, learning balance while grasping vines. Each bridge was not structure, but ancestor, passed down, growing stronger with age. But rivers shifted, floods tore away banks, some bridges drowned, dragged down by currents. Others were burned by raiders who did not understand their sacredness. The people wept, saying not bridges but family had been slain. They planted anew, but with each generation fewer remained. The monks recorded their fall with cold detachment. Yet one margin holds a softer note. If only we had such patience. You close the manuscript, imagining vast rivers crossed by living tunnels, roots weaving into pathways that carried life as well as weight. Bridges that grew, that breathed, that remembered each footstep as though it were touch, a craft not of conquest, but of waiting.